So the question that we're going to try to answer today is about European and in fact global sustainability. How do countries accelerate from ego to ecosystems? Now that's not a small question, but I think we began to talk about it this morning. Basically, it's partly about our own personal capacity. It's how do we develop ourselves to move beyond ego? Because after all, on the whole, I think that we're in a room here of the converted. We kind of agree, don't we, about what needs to happen. We may not agree on all the details. We may not agree sometimes on the tone. There might be issues we haven't brought to the table yet, but we're there's solidarity around this boat. But the vast majority of people don't agree with us. That's still the case. So yesterday, there was a BBC, the day before yesterday, there was a BBC report which was quite alarming. In this report, it said that there has been a notable decline in public support for any kind of tough deal to come out of these negotiations in Paris over the next 10 days. Out of 20 countries surveyed, and there were 1,000 people interviewed in each case, under 50% viewed climate change as a very serious problem. I think that was it. God is clearly listening. But that is the case. Since 2009, it has dropped considerably. In 2009, it was 63%. Instead of increasing, it has retreated. Now, the question is, why has this happened? Yes, we could all say, maybe this is a question of the economic crisis, maybe this is a question of the increase in terrorism. There's been all over Europe, there's been a more prevalence, there's been a growth of right-wing political movements and right-wing governments even. Are we in retreat? Are we actually having this cruise on this day at a moment when the rest of Europe and possibly even the globe feels that it needs to go into retreat? And if that is the case, how do we respond? Right? How can we invite people into this space? How can we be the welcoming space for people to come and share their fears with us? Okay, this is the kind of thing we're going to explore. So, on the one hand, it may be a question of personal capacity, one's own openness, but then we want to, as the conversation goes on, move into the mechanism. What kind of mechanisms can we use to really accelerate the good feeling that we have in this room and begin to share it with more and more people? Okay, so with that rather broad brief, I'd like, first of all, to invite Brigitte Jónsdóttir, who's the representative of the Pirate Party in Iceland. And now I must say that when I asked Brigitte, are you the leader or the representative, she said to me, there are no leaders. It is a circle of power. So that's a really great beginning. Brigitte. Hello, I think you might need to use that.
Hello, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks very much for coming. I know that you had a bit of a journey to get here today.
Yeah, I nearly snowed in this morning, but I'm here.
So, Brigitte, you are what I would call a consummate creator, right? So you founded the Citizens Movement and later something called the Movement in the wake of the Icelandic financial crisis. You co-founded and you're now chair of something called the Board of International Media.
Modern Media Institute.
And a media institution, yeah. But also on top of that, you're a poet, you're a writer, you're an artist, you're an editor, you're a publisher, and you're an activist. You set up Iceland's first online gallery for Apple, no less, and you organized something called Art Against War. So I'm in awe, I have to be honest. You know, and I'd like you perhaps you could speak a little bit yourself about what was your starting point to rise from becoming an activist to being such a key person in politics today?
Well, I guess we're either an activist we sort of, I think, I've been thinking a lot about why people are the way they are and why there are so few of us around, people that have to care more or as much about others as themselves and other factors. And I was just born activist. I was very young when I started to rise up against things that I felt were unjust. And I remember I went after a teacher when I was 13 or 14 that was sexually harassing other girls. He tried to sexually harass me, and I told him that I would hang him up on his dick if he didn't touch me. And nobody back then, it was not, you know, the headmaster just basically told me to drop it. The poor teacher had such a difficult time at home, blah, blah, blah. So, but I also had a mother who was a musician in Iceland. She was the first female troubadour. And she would make music to these really sort of deep political poems by some of our most beloved poets, and had a huge impact on me. So I guess I was an old child in a sense, and I've always been like this. And then, you know, just one thing led to another. I was really engaged in both against the Iraqi war. I organized many different protests. And then I was really, I was a part of something called Saving Iceland, which was, we sent out an SOS to environmental groups all over the world to help us against the dam that was going to be built in the east, and we were dealing with multinationals. And so we organized Iceland's first international protest camp, a direct action camp. And I was told that I was black-marked forever and I would never achieve anything after this in Icelandic society. And of course, when somebody says that to me, you know, I'll prove them wrong. So I don't know. I'm just my character is basically to be the annoying fly in the tent. Even if I smile a lot, I'm really annoying if people piss me off.
Okay, so in a way, you had a special, unique personality. But in terms of trying to develop others, what do you think are the capacities that we are looking for to be capable of this moment now?
I think it's very important that I think I've noticed that when we talk about environmental issues and big issues like terror and so forth, people are just really afraid. And when you talk about the situation with the environment and our planet and the way our lifestyle is basically killing the earth, it's terrifying. So I think it is very important, and I sort of felt it when you were talking, that we try to inspire people that they're part of something amazing, instead of, you know, retreating in a sort of in some sort of war on this element of, you know, defense. So if we are capable of creating a future vision together, you know, because even if we have to change our lifestyles, it doesn't mean it's going to be awful. It can be actually pretty awesome. And so we know about the dystopia, but we haven't created the utopia yet. And that is the task of people like us to do this. And we need to get writers and filmmakers and musicians and politicians and teachers, and just everybody needs to start to talk about this future vision. And that is something I would like for you all who are here to think about and talk about with others. It's like, how do you see yourself in 25 years?
So would you say then that that art is the key, actually, or it's just an element? I mean, I tend to see that with political movements, they tend to put art as a sort of decoration around the real message. You know, the economy is the real thing, and then art sort of, you know, eases people into that discussion. Whereas I get from you that art is the message, the means and the ends. You know, so is that?
Well, in many ways, because I've been both an artist and an activist, and it's sort of completely woven together. And we've had some really amazing political figures that have been also artists. But I think artists have a similar function as activists, and that is to move the norms, the thresholds. So here's the norm, and everybody's here in the status quo. And so the artist or the activist, they change what is the norm. And it's very unappreciated, but it's a necessary element. So we need all the different ingredients. Art is, of course, an important ingredient, and it's actually much more important than the current economic models that we live in and all these solutions that are created behind locked doors by an army of bureaucrats that have never been elected to run our world for us. So I think, by looking at, it's so important to look at the big picture. So if you don't know what it is, we're just going to go somewhere. And artists have a unique, not all artists, there are some artists that are really self-centered and egoistic, just like everywhere. There's been studies.
That's helpful though, isn't it?
Yeah, but there have been studies, which are very depressing, where it is only about 10% of the humankind cares enough about others to actually do something to help. Let's say, in the UK, disabled people, there are like a few thousand that have died because of the actions of the government, and nobody's going. There are not mass movements going out in the streets to protest this because it's not touching them. And so this was the case in Iceland when we had financial collapse. That's when finally you didn't have the same group of 50 people that were doing all the protests about everything. You all of a sudden had normal people coming out because they were afraid of their own livelihood. So how do we move? And this I would really like to hear if anybody has a solution about that here. How do we get people to care enough to understand that inaction for the rights of others is an inaction for your own rights?
Actually, it's interesting that you say that, because that is a really good example of failure, recent failure. But I also saw an example of recent success. And I was trying to think of what triggered it, and that was, for a long time, with the movement of migrants and the refugees that were suddenly flooding out of Syria, for quite a long time there was a lot of silence around it. And then, I hesitate to say, but it might well be that it was the very poignant pictures of children being washed up on the shores. So images, people really brought it home. And then I was surprised that it was like a dam burst, of people coming forward and expressing their pain and their desire to help. And literally there were movements starting up all over Europe to show their help and solidarity for the refugees. So again, you're right, it was an image that seemed to shift everything. So tell me, do you make a distinction between creatives and artists?
Yeah, actually, I haven't really thought about it, but yeah, I mean, when I was a part of, I call it action artists, or creatives is good. Like I would. This is one of the reasons I'm also very keen on protecting our rights online, because it's a beautiful portal or a beautiful way for us to connect and work together across the globe, which is very needed. So you have, and I would call it action poets. I worked a lot with poets that were, using their skill for the greater good, so to speak. I mean, Sam Hamill started the Poets Against the War. I sort of, because we're so few in Iceland, so I decided to do Artists Against the War. But it was the same idea, to get the creatives to come together and express, express in a very strong way. People are very popular. It's really great when you get very popular people that influence others to do something. And they're reluctant to do it very often. But we see more and more people coming up, like Benedict Cumberbatch has become like an activist in the UK, and he's using the Shakespearean stage to do that. So we have to, but it's not, the artist can be an inspiration. How do we inspire others? It's really about that. How do we inspire others to actually take that leap? And if I may just, like one of the things I noticed, that during times of crisis we can change things. And we are after one of the biggest crises in human history. So how can we make this understanding in this sense? El Niño is going crazy right now. There will be a lot of catastrophic elements now happening. And so how can we use that to inspire people to create something that will prevent the disasters that are coming from happening? Because it is possible, but we have to both on an individual, and let's remember that societies and all our rules and regulations and everything is based on human things. Its systems are not separated from us. They are us. And so if the system that we live in, that means that there's something awful going on, you know. So.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite into the fishbowl now Uffe Elbeck, who I think needs very little. Oh, actually, we have to do musical chairs. I'm sorry. If you could take a different chair,
yes,
and then Uffe, if you could come and sit here. This is purely for the requirements of technology, I have to say. So Uffe doesn't need any introduction to the people here, but for the sake of our international audience, I should just introduce you as the leader of Alternative Bet, or the alternative, as we like to, as it's understood or as it's used across Europe. So, Uffe, welcome. And I think
Thank you.
Again, you know, great gratitude and huge respect to you for what you are creating here in this space in Paris.
Together with all of these people.
Together with all of these people. It's a live experiment, and it's something that is so inspiring to the rest of us who are trying to do politics, or trying to survive politics in such an old way. But anyway, just a quick introduction.
Oh boy, I get humble.
Correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but I understand that you started out as a social worker, which I think in itself must have been a huge learning experience. And then you founded the sort of radical creative movement called Chaos Pilots, which even in its title, I think, evokes so very much, which became which was an international school of new business, design, and social innovation. Then between 2007 and 2009, you were the CEO of the World Out Games. That's something I haven't explored yet. And then you decided to change track and become change your consulting company with the invocation of change the game. And at that point, everything did change. And all of this before entering politics in 2011 as part of the Danish Social Liberal Party, where you served for a year as the Culture Minister of Denmark. So that was a stellar rise. Then you left and returned in 2013 to Parliament as an independent. And almost exactly 2 years ago, you founded now this new Green Party Alternative. That was quite a journey from social worker to leader of a creative movement and then into politics. Perhaps you'd like to say something about that.
No, but I was inspired by what you said about where you were coming from, and as an old man now, if you asked me the question when I was 20, I would have said, I'm just me, I'm doing my shit, and that's that. But the older I get, the more clearly it stands for me that I'm very much formed by my upbringing, my parents and my community, and I was lucky to have some very activist and radical parents, and part of what's in Danish called the folk high school movement. I know that John is starting to know a bit about that. He had learned to say Grundtvig, which is a very internal Danish quote, but actually the feeling that you could change, you had to stand up and give voice to what you believed in, and that it was okay to go for what you really desired. That was my upbringing, and it was everything has a dark and light side. The light side was that oh boy, everything is possible. The dark side was also quite ambitious performance pressure from my parents, saying that you have to do something. We don't care what you're doing, but you have to do something. You have to do good. So it was a bit of a very. My upbringing was in a very liberal family, but also a very ambitious family, and I think that tells a lot about how I have gone through my life journey.
Yeah. So radical parenting is important, turning parents here. But
my father is dead, but I have a crazy mother, and and she's turning
Crazy mothers unite.
yeah, exactly. She's turning 90 this spring, and us kids. I have 3 siblings and myself, so we are 4 kids all together. We never know exactly where she is. If she's doing her feminist workshops or local community stuff or whatever. Now she is old, but she is out there.
I'm interested. I spent a couple of years myself on a social work project, and I'm interested in how that maybe took you off the performative. Let me ask you, did it take you out of the performance space and the limelight and help develop your deeper understanding of human frailty?
No, but I've always been political in what I've been doing and again, I was 14 when the year was 1968, and it's actually first now I'm really starting to understand how much I was again formed by the youth culture and the youth rebellion. And I still remember when I was listening, where I was living together with my parents, I was listening to the radio, and there was a DJ journalist saying, and then something is happening in the US, they created a festival called Woodstock. And I still remember this, You
might need to explain.
Wow, Woodstock. And for some of the young kids here, what the hell is Woodstock? But it was something about Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Joni Mitchell and all the others. And from there I moved in, I lived in communes and was a squatter when I was around 19, 20, 21, and been very leftist, and I don't want to tell all the details, but moved from Copenhagen to Aarhus, which is the second city, and actually thought this is only going to be a very short moment of my life living there, and then I spent 30 years, and I created a youth organization called the Frontrunners, and from the Frontrunners to the Chaos Pilots, and the rest is history. But actually what I think which has also been a driver for me is this feeling of being an outsider. And it was very clearly, it really hit me when, luckily, I became a friend of Anita Roddick when she was still alive. And we had a discussion about what is the best entrepreneurs, what defines the best entrepreneurs we know about, and then after a long discussion, she pinpointed it and she said the best entrepreneurs she knew about was outsiders with a good work discipline. And it really hit me. Yeah, I'm a very good entrepreneur. No, but I couldn't clearly hear whoa, where I'm going. But because the reason why I wanted to say this about the outsider feeling, because I still have the outsider feeling when I'm in Parliament. Still, 60 years old, I still have this awkward feeling, and it has helped me a lot to have this awkward feeling. It has saved me again and again, and because I started out as a straight guy, and I knew I also was attracted to men. And turning this position from being a straight guy, 2 kids, everything, and then saying, but it's the man is actually more fun to play with. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. You know exactly what you're talking about. Anyway, but this in a way, I think a lot of the psychological dynamics in my head and in my heart goes back to this awkward position and feeling either accepted or not, and also had the feeling that I could see things from the outside. And actually, I didn't want it to be in there. I always have wanted to be on the edge of the known and the unknown, and that has really defined my life.
Well, I'm really sorry you're in the fishbowl now.
Yeah.
I totally resonate with what you're saying, because that's exactly how I define myself too, because I came from an Indonesian family and a Dutch family, and I was always on the outside in Britain. So, but that gave me the position of being a global citizen, that forced me into a bigger space. And so I think that's great for anybody listening, because so many people feel that the outsiderness makes them excluded, but in fact it's a growing reason to be included, isn't it? So I just want to just bring you to the Chaos Pilots and what it was that you were teaching and which they continue to teach, because it seems to me that that is that became a kind of a global leadership training space that gave rise to exactly the sort of qualities that it appears that we need to have to negotiate this, you know, this world that we now live in, which, you know, I mean, a chaos pilot is something exactly that I would want to, you know, give my children that kind of capacity. So you defined it at the time as playful, real world, streetwise, risk-taking, balanced and compassionate. Does that still hold, or would you add anything to that now?
For the chaos pilots? Or
no, for all of us,
yeah,
as essential qualities.
No, but I think all of them resonate still, and some of the values is actually also in the heart of the alternative. Even there's no direct link between the chaos pilots and the alternative, but I think that to really know what values you believe in and you navigate from is very, very important, because the context can change from day to day. But if you really have your values close to your heart, and you know what from where you're speaking, then you can actually handle nearly everything. And when we gave the name to this program and educational institution, the Chaos Pilots, half of the population loved it and half of the population hated it. But for me, it again resonated very, very strongly, because how do we navigate in very chaotic situations and arriving safely on the other side of the turbulence? And I think that's the capacity we need also today, because so much is unsure and the systems are really rocking. If we don't solve that, anything else can be whatever. Then the empathy crisis, that the lack of empathy, and the third one was system crisis, that the system we have is organized around ourselves, and the way we understand society doesn't function anymore. So we have to figure out how can we create new kind of system understanding, but also totally new types of both business models and institutionalized models and educational models and systems. So I think that going back to what you said about how to handle to be a human being in a time of crisis, I think you have to figure out what is your value system, and keep your value system very close to your heart. Because that's your compass. That's really your compass.
And am I right, sort of a final question, but one I think that's very important for the conversations that we had this morning as well.
Yeah.
Is it the same to be sure of your values as to be sure of the outcomes? Because it seems to me that there's always a possibility when we're growing a movement that we could ourselves create new dogmas, we could ourselves create new rights and wrongs. Whereas it seems to me that the capacity that you're describing, the artistic capacity or the capacity of the Chaos Pilot, is to stay flexible and open to constant change and constantly reinventing, being transformative in the moment, rather than arriving at settled solutions. This is how it must be done, no other way. Or am I overstating?
No, I totally agree with you. And then one more thing is that you have to have fun. No, honestly, and fun, not only fun laughing, but fun as opposite of boring. I think that there are so many boring workplaces, many boring bosses, so many boring politicians, and from time to time I really also identify myself as a boring person, but I really smell when it's boring. I want to get out of there, or try to change the dynamic. And actually, I think that it's such an interesting both political and democratic experiment what you're doing in Iceland right now. And for the people who don't know how successful you actually are, the latest polls was 36%. Whoa! I think a lot of it has to do with what you. I can't mirror myself and the alternative, but I can look at you guys, and I know that there's a certain kind of nerve and kind of authenticity and humor. Humor is the best weapon against the ego system, as you talked about. We have to be able to laugh over ourselves. And I loved the mayor of Reykjavik when he's dressing up with skirts for the Pride parade, and taking off all this power of masks and just play with life.
Well, at that point, I'd like to welcome our third guest, Caroline Lucas from the Green Party in the UK. Caroline. So Caroline is who we describe as sort of the green goddess in the UK. I don't know how many of you are here from the UK, but we have very few politicians that show that level of creativity or personal, what's the word? Well, we use the word resilience today, but vision, ongoing vision, over a long period of time in the face of all the odds. And Caroline is definitely one of these politicians. So despite Caroline having great success over the last, how many years now in politics, Caroline?
Well, I joined the party 30 years ago, so yeah,
over 30 years. And constantly increasing support from around the country. So, for example, between the last two elections, I think you moved from having just under 1% of the vote to 3.8% of the vote. So now 1.2 million people voting for the Green Party. 573 people stood, of which 123 regained their deposits, but still only one MP in the UK Parliament. How does she put up with it?
Well, I mean, you are right that the electoral system in the UK is just the definition of injustice, essentially. 1.2 million people voting Green, and yet just one MP out of 650. Our government, if you add in the number of people that didn't bother voting at all, then you can say that our government that has absolute power was elected with 24% of the population supporting it. So this is, injustice writ large.
Funny shenanigans.
Very bad.
Yeah. But you also had an activist background. So I know that you were active, for example, early on in CND, and you took part in Greenham Common. Could tell me a bit more about how you honed your. I don't want to emphasize too much this resilience, because of course everything about the Green Party is connected and creative. But tell me how much of an activist you still are.
Well, I think it's really important for politicians to remain activists. I think nothing puts people off more than seeing politicians just become, particularly men, because they are certainly in Britain still mostly men in grey suits, and they forget maybe what might have motivated them to get involved in politics in the first place. There's a lovely quote, I think it's by Alice Walker, who says that being an activist is the rent we pay for staying on the planet, which is a really nice way of thinking that actually we're just paying back the right to be here, which is a pretty amazing thing when you think about it. I mean, the odds of us all being here are fairly slim if you were to work it all out. So I think activism is something that we ought to do, should do, is part of our responsibility. And for me, in the early 80s, the big thing I was involved in was the campaign for nuclear disarmament, CND. And maybe for some of the younger people in the room now, it's hard to remember just quite how scary it was, but in the early 80s, the risk of nuclear war happening either deliberately or by mistake, just because human error happens, was actually something that was very, very real. There were lots of films around that time as well, talking about the potential for a nuclear Holocaust. So I was very involved in CND and took great inspiration from the women at Greenham Common. But I was feeling that a lot of my life was being involved in CND, a lot of my life was being involved in the environment group or in women's groups, and I felt pulled in lots of different directions. It was exhausting. And then I read a book that changed my life, which was the book by Jonathan Porritt called Sea and Green. He's still an environmental activist. If anyone comes across that name, Jonathan Porritt, he was also the head of Friends of the Earth in Britain for a while. But he wrote this book back in 1984, and it still bears rereading, which is partly a quality of how good the book is, but also a reflection of the fact that we haven't come very far in terms of how much progress we've made in addressing some of the problems he identifies then. But this book basically put together the environment, peace, democracy, feminism, made the connections between them, and put them in a kind of political, rigorous whole. And it was that kind of light bulb moment that you read something and you just think, yes, that's how I want to try and address this.
Could you just tell us a little bit more about, because I know that your PhD was about the feminine, or how women see the world differently, in other words, but in fact it was about literature, how women read. I think we're at a moment now, a point of development with feminism, where new conversations are happening beyond simply conversations about equality, which of course has not been achieved yet, but at least it's become a legitimized conversation. But maybe now we're moving into an era where we're talking more about what the feminine has to bring in politics. Could you expand a little bit about that as well?
I could, with the proviso that I know that I'm kind of treading in controversial waters. I mean, just first to reiterate what you said, the equality arguments are still there to be fought. We are nowhere near where we need to be in terms of women's representation, and in terms of the power of women and our earning power and our positions in parliament or business and everything else. So all of that still needs to be fought for. But I think you're right, perhaps there is now also a recognition that women, and again I wouldn't necessarily say this is something innate, but it can be something that is particularly more likely to happen if you're brought up in a certain way, which women and girls still tend to be, perhaps have a greater affinity with a certain value set. And I know as soon as I say that there are a million examples to show that's not the case, and it's not exclusively women, and it's not intrinsically only women, and I agree with all of that. But I just feel that, going back to something that was said earlier about a vision of how we see the world, is about being more in harmony with our environment and our planet and the other species we share it with, then it seems that we all need to be more in touch with all of the qualities that are in all of us in order to have that kind of balance. And I think that there is something that women bring to debates, conversations, politics, which often is different, but equally valuable to what has been there with some of the male debates. And again, I apologise because I know these are gross generalisations, but if I compare my experience in the European Parliament, where I was for 10 years, where there are many more women because they have more insightful electoral systems and better ways of ensuring that women are represented, then the difference between being in the European Parliament and being in Westminster, where we are slowly making progress, but it's 28% of MPs are women in Westminster, so only just over, well, no, just less than a third. In the European Parliament, there is much more of a sense of cooperation, there is much more of a willingness to work together, and you can't say that's only down to the fact that there are more women, but my personal experience at least is that having more women in politics means that it's more likely that people come together to try to find common ground rather than to simply score points. But even though I'm saying this, I can just see the ghost of Mrs. Thatcher behind me, so it is a vast generalisation, and I recognise that.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I'm beginning to pick up the conversation is that it's not as much, not necessarily women and men, as maybe the masculine energy and the feminine energy, and that men have both masculine and feminine, women have both masculine and feminine. But you know, whether or not our society is now willing to rebalance in the public life. So maybe in domestic life, or maybe in the home, or in your personal lives, you know, there's been a certain balance of masculine and feminine. But in public life, we've had a very, you know, it's been a masculine framework, but it's been populated by men through history until now. And that with the bigger changes that are coming, these are, with women, more women coming into the public life, then that gives the opportunity for different kinds of information being exchanged, or different concerns coming in and different responses. So is that something that you recognise within the Green movement?
I think it is. I mean, within the Green Party, at least, I would say that we have a lot of women in positions where they are elected, and I think that the face of the Green Party in the UK is pretty much happens to be a female face. But I think you're right, it is about the values that are being brought into the conversation and being reflected, and I think in a sense perhaps now there's just a little bit more permission for men and women to play that full range of identities and reflect the full range of values, rather than feeling quite so compartmentalised as we have done till now.
That's great. So this is the point where I'd like to begin to open the conversation up to more people. Please feel free to occupy the chair and to come in. But I'm going to perhaps let's shift now the conversation from our personal capacities to what do we feel that now, if we are to open ourselves up to the globe, if we are to recognize that we're a small but very meaningful, very excited, very talented group of people, creative, we've discovered, capacious, we've decided, open, what is it that is still blocking us? What stops more people joining us? Just to give you perhaps an even bigger framework within which this is all happening. So one of the major paradigm shifts, for example, in international relations is this shift from hard power to soft power. I don't know if you're aware of, but this idea that it's no longer just guns and money that makes decisions. What is increasingly influencing people is the power of relationships. So it's not just the relationships that we have with each other here on the boat in our communities, but global relationships. You know, there's a massive opportunity now for global relationship. But what is influencing those global relationships is probably less, or increasingly less, we hope less, military arms, and more, we're beginning to see the effects of good storytelling, changing narratives. If we look at the people who occupy our front pages, for example, now, we're looking at very small groups of people who, through an image, through one horrendous act, if we're talking now about ISIS or something like that, can capture the imagination of all of us and cause us to respond. Right? So, what do you think are, we've discussed, you know, our personal capacities, but what kind of mechanisms or what kind of activities do you think we should be pursuing that can use these new channels?
Can I just say one thing? I don't know that it's, I think it's more about how you do it than what you do, and I just wanted to reflect back on the way in which I think we need to get much better at painting a positive picture about what a green economy and a green society would look like. I think for too long the Green Movement, and indeed the Green Party, has thought that the best way to get people to change their minds was just to tell them how bloody awful it's going to be if we don't, and then logically people would recognise that they need to change. And all we've done is just terrify people, such that, you know, a logical conclusion is just to think, well, let's just go down the pub and forget about it. So I think trying to inspire people with a better vision, a much more concrete, tangible vision that you can touch and smell and feel about what the world could be like, so that instead of trying to scare people away from something, we're attracting them towards something. And I just wanted, just in terms of that sense of whether there's an image or a moment when something changes in your mind, I just wanted to share a cartoon, which is difficult because I should have drawn it rather than trying to share it verbally. But if you all imagine a cartoon that did it for me, there's a professor in front of a whiteboard. So they're in a university lecture hall, and on the whiteboard, the professor has written all of the advantages of moving towards a zero carbon economy. So you've got things like more local organic food, more public transport, homes that are properly insulated so people aren't dying of fuel, perhaps more time to spend with your family and friends because you're not working so hard. All of these wonderful things. And then there's a speech bubble from somebody in the audience, one of the students, who says, but what if climate change is a hoax and we've created a better world for no reason? and that, I think, is just beautiful, because it's that sense that irrespective of climate change, this gives us an awesome opportunity to actually move ourselves into creating this better world, which is going to be better anyway. So, we talked earlier about loss and talked about the scariness of moving into another world. But it seems to me that if we could paint a more positive picture of it, then it would be less scary.
Thank you. My name is Ronan. I'm in Paris for the weekend because I had return tickets for a romantic getaway for a relationship that ended last week. So I was like, I just want to go on my own. Yeah. So
that was a good ad.
Yeah.
He's single.
That was definitely the subtext.
Well, thanks for that contribution.
Yeah. So my contribution is one of the things that has helped me make sense of this is something that Charles Eisenstein, the spiritual activist, said about these multiple interlinked crises being ultimately a birth crisis for humanity. That there is a new self underneath that a crisis can reveal. And I was struck by you saying that only 10% of people care about a host of issues related to other people, and yet when you get people on their own, there's an immense longing for a better world, an immense tender space that we all know it's probably something that comes out actually in relationships with that special person, our partner in life. And so I wanted to maybe get your views on the politics of longing and also of vulnerability. And it seems that we're living in a moment where there's a real breaking of the taboo around vulnerability, particularly with Brené Brown's work. And it feels like as much as inspiration and excitement about an alternative is effective, and that anger can also have its place, that there's something about the invitation of collective vulnerability that might move people into a deeper emotional, or if not spiritual, center that might ignite and accelerate change. And as leaders, how do you think about the dilemma of bringing that in a political context that is so hostile to it?
If you like it, yes. Just a quick response. It was so fun when the alternative went public 2 years ago and said, now we are doing this and we believe in it and we try to make it real. Then I got a lot of questions from journalists saying, are you and I don't know if that's the right English term, but a party of protest or protest party? Because are you just someone standing out there saying you're against that and that and that and that? And then I reframed it and said, no, we are not a protest party. We are a party for
yearning.
Longing.
Yearning.
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 Yearning and longing.
Yeah, yearning. A party for yearning.
Yeah.
I'm a slow learner. But and then people said, "What have you been smoking?" Because that was just too far out. But it was actually to say that's and I can't say the word.
Yearning.
It's like learning with a Y.
Learning with a Y.
Yearning.
Yearning, yeah.
Yeah. I like to be in school again. Yearning.
It's almost like yearning.
But there's a quote of a Danish author called Carl Blixen, and now I need some Danish help. The quote in Danish is længslen pant på, at det du længes efter eksisterer. Længslen pant på, at det du længes efter eksisterer. How do we translate that into English?
Longing is the deposit of what you long for to exist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And that was that was the reason why I said we're not a protest party. We are a yearning. And actually, I think that there's I totally agree with that. People are really hungry for something else, and they really feel it deeply inside. And that was also why I think that the morning session with the Danish woman Andrea, what was that the name? Who moved into the Swedish forests. She was so sharp on that, saying we can actually imagine something else, and actually we can create what we are imagining. So we try to frame it. And of course, the first reaction from the mainstream was, "What have been smoking?" But people actually got it. Yeah.
I think that we are also reaching a time where we are finding balance, because it's been so much imbalance. So even our brains in your generation and people that are younger are much more inclined to work both ways, not only left or right. But I think it is also very important when we are creating political movements is that to inspire people to want to be a part of co-creating. So in which way they want to co-create is up to them. And I think that one of the reasons people feel alienated from the systems that are around us is because they have never put effort into and they don't see the systems we live in as a part of them. And so one of the things, and one of the reasons my party in Iceland is currently so popular is that we are basically trying to be Robin Hood of power. So we are taking the power from the powerful, which is also in relation to information and being able to have influence, and giving it to the general public. And so people have to also feel inspired to want to be in that power, you know, even if they're vulnerable or not, it doesn't matter, just to be in that power and to dare to be and take that space to be part of.
I'd like to just reflect back to you that there's a Buddhist principle that desire equals enlightenment. So if you can live in your desire and you really have, you identify with it strongly, then the opportunity of how to get that desire met appears to you. So I love what you've brought there, because it gives people permission. Whereas I think we have been living for so long in a world where we button ourselves down and we do not give ourselves permission to feel or to want, because somehow that's incorrect. That makes us either unrealistic, or it makes us greedy, or it makes us irrational. We're not allowed. So we've stitched ourselves into this work ethic where it's all about earning a certain amount of money in exchange for labor, to buy things we haven't got time to use, you know, and in the hope of eventually a life that that can't appear until we're too old to enjoy it. You know, so it's a bad deal. So I think the idea that that yearning and desire is legitimate and actually a cause for the thing to appear is great. I'd like to, Caroline, I'd like to give the audience a chance to respond to your dream moment. I don't know if you want to add something to it, but we could just break for a bit, say what you like, and see whether or not people would like to. Yeah.
I was only going to add.
Just a new man.
It's a different fish. The new fish was appeared in the fish
I
bowl.
swam away.
Damn, very lovely to see you. I can't remember what I'm going to say now. No, just about. I mean, you're talking about longing, yearning, being vulnerable, and I just wanted to add that I do think one of the reasons that we have trouble in mobilizing more people to address the climate crisis is because we don't give ourselves the time or the permission to really feel what the climate crisis is about. Because if we did, it would just be so scary and horrendous. And so people aren't really in touch so much with the horror of that. Yeah. And although we don't want to leave people or ourselves in the horror, we have to go through that to get to the positive vision that I guess we'll talk about in a moment. But it just feels to me that there's some good work going on for example, some of the NGOs in the UK, for their climate change campaign, they kind of turned it around and they called the campaign For the Love Of. So instead of saying, let's go and bash the oil companies, or at least as well as saying it, because yes, we do need to go and bash the oil companies, but as well as doing that, it was also about inviting people to say what they loved and why that was connecting them to the climate crisis, because they wanted to reach out and protect that from what might happen. And there's, last point, there's just one wonderful article by Zadie Smith, the author, who talks about how we have not allowed ourselves really to feel the reality of the climate crisis. And it's so beautiful, and it's just written in the most elegiac language, and she basically moves us through to thinking about what is it that we've done to what is it that we can do. And she just does it beautifully in a couple of thousand words. It's wonderful.
Perhaps you could share it with all of us. I will. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Yeah. But touching up to the light.
You need to turn it on.
Yeah.
Okay, hello. My name is Kasper Bach, and I felt that I had to join the conversation because I'm actually working with trying to depict some of the both challenges and possibilities that are related to climate change. I'm the founder of a non-profit organization called Mind the Earth, and we are actually now on the. I've been encouraged to do this exhibition by Connie Hedegaard, who saw the exhibition in Copenhagen that I did, also called Mind the Earth. And it's actually now on display at Champs-Élysées, where you can all see it, and it's been accredited by Ségolène Royal to be an official part of the COP21. And what we try to do is to show some of the images of what we are the way we are actually treating our planet, seen from Google Earth, so that you can see the cattle farm of 150,000 heads, feed farm in Iowa that are only fed by soybean from Brazil. You see the melting water rivers on top of Greenland. You see, but also the good solutions. The giant solar power plants that are established in the U.S. and in China and other places. So this is actually, I'm trying to do this in my own small way, but actually, using the images as you were talking about as a motivator, and trying to also link, some of the hard facts in the IPCC reports with the concrete cases where you can see what is actually going on the ground. So this is my ambition, and I hope this can contribute to some of the discussions.
That sounds fantastic. You were talking just now, with Uffe just now, about the extraordinary opportunity of this moment, with Caroline too. The technology that we have, the new expectations that we have, the new ways that we're using our time to frame the future for people, to tell new stories, to create new narratives. This is the soft power that is available to us now. And yet, we see from our media and from the headlines every day that it's not just the good people who are seizing those tools. It's not the good people only who know how to tell stories. And that to some extent there's a responsibility on those of us who wish to save the planet to step up now with the creation of narratives and the telling of new stories, the capturing of imagination. So using that as a starting point, I'd like to invite anybody to come and join us in this conversation, and perhaps in two ways. One, share your vision with us. You can share your simple longing, if you like, or share the image that you came. But also a little bit, maybe explore what mechanisms we can use as a group to, to accelerate our thinking, to be able to share ever more effectively our principles, our values. By what means? So we talk about a global movement, we talk about a European movement, we talk about the internet as a space. Is the internet actually the globe, or is it just people of like minds talking to each other? What are the effective tools, and what can be practically done quite fast? How do we share our stories? So I'm going to hand over now to Brigitte, I think. Yes, I can see she's yearning for something. But I see a horribly empty chair, and I'm hoping somebody's going to come and sit.
Yeah.
All
All right, thank you. I got an idea yesterday that is very much in this spirit. I was talking to a guy that is making software, open source software that blocks all these grabbers of that are grabbing all our metadata, all our sort of personal data that comes every time we go and Google or whatever. And I just got this idea because I used to play a game called Civilization. How many of you have? Yeah. Okay. And then there is this thing in Iceland called EVE Online, and it sort of completely created a new world, you know, but it's in space. So I thought, why don't we make a computer game that is motivating? So every time you make a decision, you get real-time data. So let's say you build, you know, a new aluminum smelter in Iceland, and you see, you know, how much it's going to pollute, how much it costs to get the bauxite from Australia to Iceland, and you know how much of our currency is now invested in the aluminum industry and so forth. And so and even our small decision, you know, what impact does it make when we buy a bottle like this and drink our water from it compared to drinking it from the tap? And where is it safe to drink water, and so forth. So it would be a brilliant way to make us more aware of, you know, what impact each action or inaction has. So I challenge anybody that's in here to start to think about how we can make this game. I would really like to play it, because I thought it was so depressing in Civilization that you sort of won the game by going to space because the Earth was completely fucked. So, you know, how about... But I want to tell you a little beautiful story, which is why I really care so much about the Earth. I was invited to a poetry festival in Colombia in '97. And at the festival were the Kokis, the Holy Mamas of the Sierra Nevada. And I really connected with them, and they invited me to participate in a ritual. And they specifically came to the festival to make the mountain in Medellin happy again. And so I went to this ritual, and a part of the ritual, and there were poets from each continent in the world doing this ritual with them. And we were to visualize the Earth in the future in a wool thread, and then they would bury this thread into the soil. And I was visualizing the Earth in the future, and I saw so clearly the Earth smiling from within, and I knew that that was my mission. And so that is really my vision for the future. How we'll execute it is up to all of us. I don't know. I don't think any of us really know, but if we start to talk about it, then we will eventually reach a space where we can start to co-create a joint vision, because no one person's vision is the vision.
Yeah, besides singing, I have a job in Denmark where we do everyday things. And there, all my colleagues, I see them use too much electricity, too much plastic bags. They wash half machines, and the same with the dishwashing. And when I tell them, oh, you should wait, don't start this machine when it's half full, they say, oh, it doesn't matter in all. And then I've been thinking a lot about that from leaders, people in that kind of jobs that think that it doesn't matter what they do because they cannot be activists, and we cannot all be that. But in the everyday life, if I spare a plastic bag, my neighbor do it, and the neighbor take the bicycle once a week instead of, then it would really be something if we all did that. And I think we should talk more about that from the top, that you can do something even though you don't want to be an activist.
Thank you. So is there a role then for politicians or teachers, maybe parents, everyone, to actually make concrete suggestions to people? You think that helps rather than just silently criticizing them in our heads? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that you need to tell them that yes, you can do something. It's only when you do something, then it will circle around, then your neighbor will do it, and we can all be, we can't all be somebody who works in as a leader in a company who tells that this company should be a green company, but that should happen also. But everybody should do something. It's the same with the world peace. You have to start with yourself, and you should talk about that. I think leaders should. That's my vision. That all the activists would tell that too.
Thank you.
I agree with that, but I think policymakers and politicians have a responsibility to create an enabling policy framework to make it easier for people to make the right decisions, because I think sometimes it does feel to people that they're being lectured at, to leave their car at home, for example. And yet if you live in, in a place where there isn't good public transport, or where the public transport is really expensive, then that's really hard to do. Or we lecture people, I mean, I try not to, but people do, about, flying, for example. You come to Paris from the UK. I was lucky I took the Eurostar, but actually the Eurostar, the train costs 3 times as much as the flight. So we need to be putting the right price mechanisms and the right incentives in place to make it easier for people to do the right thing. And I wonder as well, another policy that our party has, to really try to address that sense that why should I not bother filling my dishwasher if the person next door, is flying off, once a month to their second home in Madeira. What difference does my little washing machine make? And one of the policies that we've been looking at is this idea of personal carbon quotas, which is the idea that that each individual has just like you have a credit card, you have carbon credits up to a certain amount, and if you need more, then you need to buy them off someone who hasn't used them all. So it has a redistributive effect, particularly from richer to poorer. But it also means that there is a cap that you can begin to bring down, which means that all of us are recognizing that we have choices to make between flights that we might choose to make, or eating strawberries out of season, or whatever it is. And it's a way of trying to make it a bit more of a personal thing.
That also sounds to me as if you're introducing a gaming element, exactly what you were saying there, Brigitte, to it. Or a playful element. I remember when somebody told me that if I turned my water off while I was brushing my teeth, right, rather than let the water run while I brush my teeth, and then suddenly I was given a huge set of statistics on how much water this would save, that would definitely go on my credit, wouldn't it? But it's that sort of gaming the situation, becoming playful in it, rather than lecturing and sort of making the whole thing look unattractive. So is this building up the attraction of change?
Maybe sport out of it.
Actually, I'm going to say something completely different. No, but it was related to what you said, and also to something else which has been said today. And I'm struggling with, why don't we dare to use our power? And it goes both as individuals. Why don't we dare to be who we are? What holds us back on a personal level? But also, why don't we dare to use our power as a political movement, as political parties? And the reason why I'm saying the last thing is that, and this is a very Danish context, which I'm referring to now. We just had a change of power in Denmark in June, and we got a liberal, conservative, liberal, right-wing government. And in just 3 months, they have changed the laws. They have changed what the money should go to and not go to. They have decided that they want to lower the tax. They want to make it cheaper to buy expensive cars. They're taking money away from art, culture, environment, etc. And I wrote a piece on my Facebook saying that actually I had to say that they are really doing their job very well. Actually, what they're doing is that they are actually very ambitious to reach their goal, and they're doing what they said they wanted to do. And the reason why it's so successful is because the last government, which I was actually part of for a period, we didn't dare to actually to be fulfilling our vision. We were much more like a bureaucratic government trying to clean the table and secure that there was black figures under the bottom line, etc. But there was no vision, there was no creativity, there was no dreams on the table, there was no saying we can change the society in the direction that we actually wanted to heading. So why don't we dare to take our power? And that goes both as a person and also as organizations and as political parties, as institutions. Why don't we dare it? Why do the right wings dare it? They're so good at it. Yeah. but really they are so good at it, and they're so good at framing. For example, I was in a TV debate Tuesday night, and one of the right wing, I hate to say right wing, but that's what he is. We talked about refugee crisis. And again he used all this refugee shopping as an shopper, asylum shoppers. And he used the word asylum shoppers. That okay, we know actually really, guys, we know all these refugees that are coming into Europe, but most of them they're just coming because they want to take our jobs and get money, blah blah blah. And they use our system, and they're just asylum shoppers. And so they were so good at framing it, because then everyone sitting back in the apartments or where they're living, yeah, there's something to it. Asylum shoppers. We like the word. We like the word. Yes. And so actually my question is, why are the bad guys so good at what they're doing? And what are we not? And that's the question. I really don't get it. And I think the only reason, or one of the responses should be that the parties are much better where we are than where they are. Honestly, I think we have to conquer with good energy and hope and excitement, and this is goddamn sexy. Honestly.
Thank you everyone for being present.